Hello and welcome to this Frontline webinar on Is India moving away from the American orbit? The subject, as it's designed, is to inquire and find out what has changed in Indo US relations. Ironically, after the 1998 nuclear tests and the Kargil War of 1999, Indo US relations moved in a very positive direction after all the mistrust of the 70s, especially. India and the US in the tango moved to sign the 2008 civil nuclear deal. India in 2005 voted against Iran at the International Atomic Energy Agency, which many believed was to please the Americans. Successive prime ministers since 1998, Indian prime ministers, have been very, very keen to improve relations with the US. Ironically, as Prime Minister Modi took over, his personal relationship with Donald Trump in his first term and now in his second term was trumpeted as one of the key factors in the improvement of relations. There was a lot of stress on the personal. And in a twist of fate, one of the casualties of Operation Sindoor have been Indo-US relations. The kind of language that American officials, including the American president, have used, I don't believe I've heard from a non-neighboring country in a while. So what does this all mean? The tariffs that were imposed, the 25%, apart from the 25%, a 25% penalty on oil imports from Russia while sparing the Chinese. Today, we have a situation where there seems to be some kind of a back channel at work. The meeting of the new Indian lobbyist with Donald Trump, that led to a statement from Modi. And plus, we now also have a situation where others too have gotten into the act. And seems to be some effort on the part of the Americans to backpedal and possibly arrive at a new trade deal. So what does this all mean? Apart from taking your questions, which we will do in the course of the program, I'm joined by two experts. Atul Mishra, Associate Professor at the Shiv Nadar University in Delhi, and Sanjay Kapoor, longtime analyst and editor of Hardnews. I'm going to first go to you, Atul, and ask you, can you make a little bit of sense? Where do our relations with the United States stand as of today?
Thank you, Amit. Glad to be here. We are at an absolute crossroads in our relationship with the United States. What has happened, if I could set out very briefly the developments of the past few weeks, what has happened is that there has been a dramatic decline in the importance of India in America's overall strategic calculus. And that goes something like this. I think if you recall, something very early on that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, said with regard to the contemporary power hierarchy, and he said that we've entered decisively a realm of multipolarity, and the three powers that he mentioned as constituting that multipolar world were in fact the US, China, and Russia. And my feeling is that now is the focus of America's strategic calculus. One consequence of that is that I think there is a lack of, we're not very clear, but I suspect there is a lack of interest in the United States in balancing China, especially in Asia and across the Indo-Pacific. And if balancing China is no longer a priority, it could be on the agenda, but if it is no longer a priority, then India's importance within America's strategic calculus goes down. So that, I think, is the big story, the framing story that has brought us to today. Two other things have happened. I think relative to previous administrations, there is this sense of urgency within this administration about getting India to open its markets to American businesses. And this is something that previous administrations had hoped, and they'd hoped that, as part of the gradual reform process, India would end up delivering on this score. But I think what has happened is that because the protectionist impulse has sort of gone big around the world, India is, of course, no exception to it. And also the areas that we want to sort of, agriculture plus the sectors, the areas of our economy that we want to protect from external competition are areas that are central to our domestic political calculations as well. So there is impatience within the United States with regard to this part as well. They want to open the Indian economy and have access to the Indian markets in those areas as well. And of course, the third dimension is the fallout of the Operation Sindoor. The fact is that there is a certain claim that has been made by the Americans with regard to the role that they played, and particularly President Trump played in bringing about a ceasefire. And because India has not acknowledged that role, I think that has angered the leadership there. And that then has resulted in, I think, a few very, very problematic moves, and moves that India, of course, would find very objectionable. One of them is, of course, hyphenating the two, and the other is sort of prioritizing Pakistan over India. So all of that has led us to a very, very uncertain moment in India-US relations, and I think even if some tactical moves are made, the larger strategic picture looks bleak at this stage.
Right. I want to bring Sanjay Kapoor in at this time. Sanjay, we also saw, in the midst of all the tensions between India and the United States, and especially the barrage of statements coming from Washington and the relative silence from New Delhi, in the midst of all this, we had the SCO summit in China. And our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, had gone there. And then we saw this much talked about picture of Modi, the Russian President Putin, and of course Chinese President Xi, who was the host of the summit. That there's that moment in which was recorded by not just the still cameras, by video cameras. Do you believe that that picture is that Prime Minister Modi sending out a message to the Americans that, look, we have other options?
Thank you for inviting me to speak here. And, the fact of the matter is,
Sanjay, I think we can't hear you. At least I can't. I think your mic can't hear you. I think your mic is on mute, Sanjay. Your mic is on mute.
okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah. So the question that I was posing, I'll repeat it in case you didn't hear it, is that what is the message that Tianjin picture sends to the rest of the world, especially to the United States, that does India have options now?
Knows India rather well about what is the depth, and US thinks that by trying to withdraw from India, India is losing leverage against the traditional enemy, China, because China shares about 3,500 kilometers of border with India, and it's a very hostile border. They have troops also being parked at the border itself, and there is a certain kind of animosity which is still there. Our chief
Sanjay, again, your mic is going on mute.
Our chief of army staff and others had said very categorically that India was fighting a war with Pakistan and China and Turkey at the same time. So if that is the case, I don't think much has really changed in the last 2-3 months. So there is, I think US knows that India loses leverage by it going away, and why it chose to do it, why it chose to jettison it at the moment, is very clear that India is not so important for them. And that is why they
want. The question that I was asking you, Sanjay, is this. What message does that picture send of Modi, Putin, and Xi together in China?
my audio goes away. I have to change my room. If you give me 2 minutes, I'll change my room
Yeah,
and go
sure.
elsewhere.
So I'm going to bring Atul into this. Atul, what is the message being sent by that picture?
Amit, in international relations, all symbols are substantive, and I think the picture that was sent out, the message that that picture sent was that India had options, and not just options of the normal variety, but options that can catalyze an alternative international order. If you sort of put this into perspective, all along this very special relationship that we've cultivated with the United States, we've actually never given up on the idea of playing a catalytic role in bringing about an alternative international order. And this
So,
kind of fence-sitting.
I'm going to interrupt you there. So
Yes,
then how come in 2023,
yes,
the government of India in its wisdom decided to hold the SCO summit suddenly in virtual mode?
right. So
2023, we were the hosts, and suddenly we see this announcement that the SCO summit, which is a big thing, and everybody travels. I don't know, but barring in Corona, it's probably never been held in virtual mode, and there was no Corona this time. But obviously, the government of India decided. So how does that sit, with this kind of sense that
so
because
right.
strategic autonomy, non-alignment, whatever you call it. I mean, these are finally phrases. How does that sit? That's the question I want to ask you.
So my reading of that behavior generally, Amit, is the following: when you position yourself on the fence and you call it strategic autonomy, you can call it multi-alignment, etc. You have greater flexibility when it comes to responding to external changes. And at that moment, because the relationship with the United States was stable and there was a fair bit of predictability, you could send out a message to China that while you wanted to have an in insofar as the SEO and the Eurasian geopolitics was concerned, you were not ready at that stage to normalize the relationship. And now what has, or sort of actually make moves towards some kind of a reset in the relationship. And now that you've had, some serious setbacks coming from Washington, because you've been fence sitting, and because you've never abandoned the idea of non-Western international orders as well, you've managed to sort of very quickly move in the other direction and make it appear as if there's nothing particularly unusual or abnormal about that move.
So what is your sense, Atul? I mean, I don't know if the analogy is, quite works, but India put all its eggs in the Bangladesh basket, in Hasina's basket in Bangladesh. Now we seem to have put all our eggs in Trump's basket. But as you rightly point out, we always had a foothold in BRICS, in SCO, and so on. And we have quickly, deftly sent out a different message. But what does it mean for our own foreign policy? I mean, look, we are a big country today. The resources that we had even in May 98, they differ, hugely. We are a country with big resources. We are a country with a population which is increasingly more skilled and talented. So it's not as if India's resources are shrinking. And as you mentioned, if the whole idea is that the Americans no longer need us to rebalance China in their perception. So there's some basic rethinking that we also must do as far as our relationship with China and other big powers is concerned. Do you think that's happening?
I don't know if that is happening, but even if it is happening, I think there is a fundamental problem, a structural problem, as we academics like to call it. And you can sort of basically say a very, very difficult problem. And that problem, Amit, is roughly this. You rightly pointed out that we are very resourceful. To be very resourceful is not the same thing as having adequate power. We are big on demography, but relative to demography, just ask ourselves this tough question: how skilled is our workforce relative to the demography that we have, relative to the economic potential that we have, but also the imperative of generating wealth? So we are very resourceful, but we are not adequately powerful. And this adequacy element has to be viewed in two ways. One, relative to what our potential is, but more importantly, relative to what our requirements are from the international system. And what that means is that, firstly, we're not wealthy enough. And because we don't have enough wealth, we cannot transform it into enough hard power. What that basically means is that we need to rely upon external actors in the sense of creating a strategic environment that is more conducive to us. Now, during the Cold War period, for the most part, and particularly after 1971, we relied on the Soviet Union to provide that strategic environment that was favorable to us. Very different from saying that we wanted the Soviet Union to provide security to us in our bilateral equations with our adversaries. But we needed that favorable strategic environment, which a great power could provide. In the aftermath, 1999, 2000 onwards, for the past quarter century, America had played that role for us. And now what has happened is that now the Americans, because they don't want to play the balancing game, we are exposed. But the problem that is at the heart of Indian foreign policy is that there might be enough wisdom. There is no solution to how to convert our resourcefulness into power. And so long as we are not powerful enough relative to A, our ambition, and B, the requirements of the international environment, we will keep, this bit of a grass hopping thing, if you like. We will call it multi-alignment, or we'll keep, have an in all kinds of fora. So we want to have an in G7, in G20, in BRICS Plus, and in SCO. The consequence is that...
Atul, just hold that thought. I have a question here from Lakshmi R. Srinivas, which is in the same vein. And
Yes.
she's asking, hi, we are surrounded by failed states. How do we maintain the fine balance between US, China, and Russia?
That question is for me?
That question is for you.
Okay, so Lakshmi, thank you for the question. I wouldn't actually characterize any of these countries in our neighborhood as failed states. Firstly, that's a Western way of characterizing countries that they feel are not meeting the criterion of a functional polity from that point of view. I think there is considerable functional disrepair that you will find in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. Currently, you're sort of seeing a crisis in the neighborhood, but I will not use the term failed state. What I would say is that we have a very challenging neighborhood. And at the heart of that challenging neighborhood is the fact that China is, or even though it is not a South Asian country, it is a South Asian actor. And for us to manage our neighborhood, we need to manage our relationship with China. And to manage that relationship with China, we needed the United States to provide us with a bit of a leg room, strategic space, and a bit of a backstop. Because we don't have it, because we don't have that leg room right now, it is advantage China, and this is likely to continue for quite some time. Russia, insofar as our immediate neighborhood, is, I would say, a secondary player. And so long as we are able to have a robust relationship that would have some indirect influence on China, but not really. Insofar as our neighborhood is concerned, it's China that we have to manage. And at this stage, they clearly have an upper hand.
Right. I think we have Sanjay back on.
Can I come on this a little bit?
Yeah. I was just going to ask you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you. I can see you. I can do everything as long as
we were discussing the messaging. We were discussing the messaging that came out of that picture in Tianjin. So what does that show us? What does it mean? What is the message that Prime Minister Modi was sending out when he held those three hands together?
I mean, what is coming out is very Bollywood style, in a certain way, to show that we have back on. You may go away from us, but we also have back coming from Russia and China. But I'm not very sure whether Russians and the Chinese really trust us. I'll go back to a statement of a Brazilian economist coming in from Rio summit of BRICS recently. And he said India is an outlier, a country which cannot be trusted. It is like a Trojan horse of the West. So in a certain way, as I keep saying, in 2 months, how can things change so dramatically? Because immediately after the so-called 4-day war, we were calling China all kinds of names. What has changed since then? We sorted out the border? We don't even have been able to restore the flights between India and China. And till not too long back, maybe a month ago or less, China was pulling out all its engineers from the Apple factory. They do not want their presence. So, in a certain way, there are still major misgivings. There is lack of trust. So, for show business, India might show to the Americans that look here, we have support. We are two major countries with a billion plus people, and we can, in a certain way, counter you. But US knows that you are a small player. We have about $4 trillion. That too, after much calculation, GDP, which is a small drop in the ocean, come to compared to what the Chinese have, what the Americans have. So, in a certain way, we have to be very circumspect. Play.
Sanjay, on the picture, I'm sorry to keep bringing in the picture. It was taken note of by President Trump, and he said something like India has gone with the Russians or let them go, something
Yeah,
to
there
that.
was a certain,
Yeah.
there was
So,
indeed.
was the purpose achieved then?
I'm not very sure because President Trump, one statement should not be taken as the only statement that he'll make because he keeps going back and forth on certain things. 42 times he said that he stopped the war against China, against Pakistan. Indians are not willing to buy that. And similarly, next day, one day he says that we are on the threshold of signing up trade treaty with India. The next day it says to European countries that you should slap tariff worth maybe 100% to both against India and China for buying oil from Russia. So what do you believe? I mean, what is that? I mean, what is happening with many of our people back home in India, especially the Twitter world, that they end up believing whatever sounds good for India? But that's not the only truth. There is so much more that is happening, and one has to, I think, be cognizant of that. For that matter, I tell you, why did the Americans, why did the U.S. government impose tariffs on India? Everybody says that because of the Russian oil, but no, the truth is that in the US wants to open up the Indian market, wants to destroy Indian oligarchs. That is in their reckoning. The people were stopping all kinds of reforms taking place. People were stopping, the opening up of the agriculture sector. So there are many issues. These are not something that are talked about because I think much of the Indian media is controlled by oligarchs, if you allow me to call Badanis and the Ambanis of the world.
Well, you already did.
Hmm.
Yeah. So to return, Sanjay, to you've been watching foreign policy for a long time. How is it that where does India stand? As Atul was rightly pointing out, in the 70s we took comfort from the Soviet Union. In the 90s and the early part of the 2000s, we took comfort from our relationship with the United States. What about India emerging as a power on its own in dealing with the rest of the world?
I think there is a certain amount of misreading of the world that takes place in India's South Bloc. We end up overrating too much that India has. And I think what Mr. Trump has done is to downsize India to such an extent that we need to recalibrate what exactly is happening. He is of very clear view that US has to negotiate with Russia. They think it's a military power, and China. India is a peripheral player. So we need to figure it out how to make ourselves more relevant. The truth is that India's, there is no manufacturing in this country. There is nothing that is happening that is going to excite the world. They want to use India as a market, and India is not willing to be just a market and do nothing else because they don't create jobs as much as is required. And the biggest problem that India faces are jobs. So I think that is major challenge that India needs to figure out how to handle its foreign policy, how to handle US because US many options. They have too many balls in the air. They keep juggling one after another. So in a certain way, they realize that even Mr. Trump and US, United States of America, decides to move away from the pivot towards Russia, towards Asia that Mr. Obama had done some years ago, then they need to figure out how to make themselves far more relevant. And that is the challenge I think the Middle East also continues to face because they want to ensure that US remains invested in the Middle East. So they worry when US becomes more
Right.
independent of them. So India is also, I think, feeling the pain of US going away from our their arc of view of India or of the Asian region, and in a certain way it becomes difficult for them to how to make ourselves relevant, because if India is not factored when US is talking with China, or China is not, and US doesn't feel threatened by China, then we don't know how to deal with that situation.
Right. I'm going to take a question here from one of our viewers, and Atul, if you can take it. Anagha Nair is asking, do you think India will be able to have a strategic alliance with China without compromising its national interest? I'm taking part of the question only. I'm not taking the rest of it. So I'm going to, because it's actually two questions in one. So I'll just give you the first part, if you don't mind, Atul.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes. No. So the short answer to Anagha's question, Amit, is no. And that is because there are very clear limits to what can be achieved in India-China relations. And there are two problems here. One is, actually there are three problems here. One is the bilateral equation.
Do academics always say three problems or two problems? What is the...
Well, I'll work with three. I'll work with three. Firstly, I think there is a bilateral component there, and the conventional and the arrangement there has been that we would sort of sequester or treat the boundary dispute or territorial dispute as separate from other dimensions. But the territorial dispute is always susceptible. The overall relationship is always susceptible to being derailed because of instability on the boundary. So that's one part. So that is always one reason for why instability will be there, Anagha. The second point is, China basically sets the tone for India's foreign policy in South Asia. And if you're a power of any consequence or ambition, you do not want your neighborhood to sort of sway to the tune of another great power. So that's a challenge. But the biggest challenge is that China will not let India expand its influence, rise in terms of its power profile. And China, in fact, has all the incentive to not let you grow economically and militarily beyond the point. Because you're just right in the neighborhood, you can potentially become a peer competitor. And that, just from the point of view of logic of power politics, is not a great thing. So a strategic alliance with China, no.
Right. So there's an interesting question from Imtiaz Hamdani. And I think this seems to be a quote. I can't guarantee, but I will read it out from Dr. Jayashankar's book. And Sanjay, this is for you. And he says, this is a time for us to engage America, that's a quote, manage China, cultivate Europe, reassure Russia, bring Japan into play, draw neighbors in, extend the neighborhood, and expand traditional constituencies of support. That's quite a mouthful. Anyway, it's all very interesting. So the question that Imtiaz Hamdani is asking is this: is this statement practical for India at this critical juncture of global flux? That's for you, Sanjay.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Mamdani. I get a sense that we're talking of an ideal world where you can manage, you can deal with US, you can do all that. It doesn't happen, because when you have a situation like Galwan, where you don't know what is really happening, and then you read in websites like War on the Rocks, that India, in the reckoning of US, failed to take on China, so they cannot be a trusted ally. So they have to be taken with a pinch of salt whenever they come and take on China. So that way, you have to be mindful that China cannot be managed in India's reckoning. How do you manage China? Because there is so much of history, there's so much of past, there's so much of civilizational connect between the two countries, and they are not very fond of seeing each other's eye to eye. Well, one thing that is also forgotten, that India never dealt with China for many years. It was always arbitered through Tibet. Even the Buddhism, for that matter, came to China through Tibet, not directly from India. So there are misgivings. There are problems which are there between various relationships between India and the rest of the world. So I have my, reservations about how it can be done at the moment, not in the ideal situation. And we cannot do it till the time we have some support coming in from the US. And that is why India thought that India could rise with support from the United States of America. But US also has a different view. It has a different way of looking at the world. And Asia in the reckoning seems to be falling off the map at the moment. They seem to be more decided in some ways that they will deal with China and let China look after Asia. And that is what is a cause for worry for India, because if we don't become relevant, then we don't get the kind of aid and support that we hope for. Because you must remember that India's rise in the last 10, 15 years is also linked to America's favorable perception about us. And almost 60 lakh Indians stay there, and they have been able to raise the economic standards of many of the Indian middle class. They help in stoking certain dreams which were non-existent earlier. I belong, as Amit does, to a generation which has seen many changes taking place in the world, and especially at the time when Indians were very conservative in how they looked at life, and it changed dramatically, especially with the explosion of the IT business and the way that the route opened up to
Right.
the
Right.
yeah.
So we have a question now, Atul, from Mansi, and she's asking. India currently seems to be in reactionary mode. Maybe she means reactive. India seems to be in a reactive mode because of the surprises being thrown our way. In all of this, is there any possibility or space for a principled stand and any soft power that may stem from it?
Okay, thank you. So, you might as well have said reactionary to a certain extent, given the conservative sway around the world. But Mansi, uh, the inherent in your question, I think, is an interesting insight, and which is that we seem to be in a reactive mode. I was a little concerned at the extent of animated warmth that was displayed by the Prime Minister in Tianjin, because you don't want to do that. You want to take your time. You want to sort of signal. To the United States that that you have other options, but you don't want to signal to the Chinese when they are, holding this summit and they're going to be following it up with another major event, that you're warming up to them a little too much. So there is reactive element there. And then, of course, the moment Trump sent out that tweet, you responded to it almost immediately. So there is a reactive element. I think the lesson there is to sort of be a little calm, be cautious, and not be as demonstrative. That's number one. Principled stand. I mean, principles are at a discount in international politics currently. So I wouldn't hold India, I wouldn't expect India to sort of take a principled stand. I think a consistent stand that is aligned with what a good reading of India's interest, I think, would be a good thing. And insofar as soft power is concerned, forgive me, but I've never considered that as a serious category when it comes to conducting foreign policy.
Right. And, on that, I just want to, since we were talking about China, I'm a bit puzzled why the United States didn't impose the penalty on China, because after all, they are also buying huge amounts of Russian oil. And why did they not put penalty sanctions on the Russians themselves? Because they are also the sellers. I mean, I'm a bit puzzled. I mean, maybe Atul, you can make some sense of it for me and for our viewers.
No, so those are the puzzles that social scientists are also, are grappling with currently. But this is how it looks like to me. We only have explanations. We don't know what is going on. But the explanation to me is roughly this. With the Chinese, the US wants to compete fiercely insofar as technology is concerned. It wants a trade reset so that the bilateral trade becomes rationalized. And what it does not want is to get into a balance of power game with the Chinese. And that's a good way, therefore, to sort of signal to them that, look, our primary problems with you lie in the realm of technology and economy, and not in the realm of strategy. And one way in which you signal that is by saying that one actor that was central to our strategic approach to you. Our prior, our traditional game of balancing you was India, and we are willing to be harsh to India. We are willing to actually penalize India for its decisions, and decisions actually aimed at ensuring its own energy security. Why not Russia? I frankly do not think that that they believe that by cutting off sources of Russian money, they'll be able to bring about a change in Russian behavior in Ukraine. I don't think that is something that is that they genuinely believe. What is in all likelihood the case is that India is the softest, between China and Europe and India. India was the one that was the weakest actor, and one you could very easily hit at. The Europeans buy a fair bit of Russian gas. The Chinese buy more oil than we do. And ideally, if you actually wanted to pressure Russia to sort of change its behavior in Ukraine, you should have done that. But the reason you're not doing it is because I don't think you seriously believe that is going to deter Russian behavior.
Sanjay, I wanted to ask you, bring you in here. The kind of language that Trump's minions have used, especially Peter Navarro being an example. Brahmins profiteering, so and so profiteering. One may or may not agree whether our big conglomerates should make money out of refining and selling oil. But it appears to me as an analyst that Trump only wants his companies to make profit. I mean, he has a problem if Indian companies profit. I mean, or on the face of it. And the question that I want to ask you is that, is there apart from the trade issues that, he keeps, and he's been talking about this for a long time, Trump, about India's high tariffs. There's nothing new in what he's saying.
Tariff king.
Is there something deeper? I mean, are they concerned about India's rise? Do they see India also as a threat? Is that the reason why we are seeing all this?
I think we would be overestimating ourselves. I don't think India is considered to be a threat by the Americans. They would want India to open up the market. They would like to destroy, as I said earlier, the oligarchs that in a certain way surround the prime minister, prevent a certain policy which would be aligned with the United States of America. That is what they want. I mean, as long if we submit, prostrate, do everything that the Americans want, then they would be not so unhappy. But the truth is that Indians play all kinds of games.
Police are never happy when you prostrate. They always want more, no?
They want more. They want more. So Indians are that way very clever. Some years ago, I was in the US, and I remember a government official complaining to India that we do everything to India, and all the bureaucrats who come to Washington promise that they will do certain things. When they go back, they do just the opposite. What is the answer? I said, no answer. You have to deal with them in a manner that they understand, not in the manner in which you understand. So he said, how do you explain that? I said, I don't want to do that for you, but I know how things happen in India, and nothing without pressure being put from the right quarters. So the Prime Minister of the day, whoever it was, would certainly ensure that people sweet-talked the Americans into believing that good work will happen. But he himself would also tell the same people that, look here, don't do anything for him. So that has been the practice for quite a while. But having said that, the Americans have been trying very hard to dismantle the very structures that sustain these kind of obstacles, these obstructions that in their reckoning are preventing the Americans from doing business or taking over greater control over our economy. But that's not likely to happen anytime soon. We are not a threat to them. We are a resource in a certain way that they want to leverage on.
Right. Now, this is a question I want to pose to Atul as well. Atul, is there anything more to the American attitude? Because it is, a very sharp attitude. It doesn't sit well between, allies. I was talking to an analyst friend of mine, and, we were discussing whether, non-neighbors have used such terminology for India in a while, in a country where, natural allies, all that kind of stuff. And of course, I want to add a caveat that Mr. Trump is he has a special status in the sense that you can always rely on him to say the unexpected, say something which is absolutely contrary to a previous position. All these things are there, and it would not come as a surprise that India and the US might finally agree to a trade agreement. But as you were pointing out earlier in your comments, is that whether this lends itself to reliability. One of our well-known diplomats, M.K. Bhadrakumar, in one of his ex-posts said that, the US is not used to long-term relationships. They've never been in one. And he was pointing to India's relationship with the Soviet Union and, with Russia later. I think there's some merit in it. Anyway, to bring my longish question to a focus, the question I want to ask is there anything more in this attitude? Should Indian analysts be looking beyond? You see, the end of the day, apologists and analysts are in two different categories. And if all of us as analysts see our country's interest first, how is it that the Americans have gone, from May of this year, let's look at it pre-Sindoor, to where we stand now? I mean, Modi ji had gone in February, he said he was one of the quickest of the blocs. What happened? Is there anything more to it?
Amit, I think, so three-part response to this, and you've covered one part, which is Trump is special. So, anything is par for the course in terms of the language used. So if he calls the Indian economy dead, you want to sideline it, but it is important to have an explanation for it, and that you've given. I think there are two other things here. One is, insofar as the other officials are concerned, they've clearly been given this brief to go after India in terms of India's economy, in terms of economic model, and so on and so forth. The brief has definitely come from on high. But I do believe the articulation, the translation of that brief into actual wording, that is marred by some traditional, if you might like, white bias against the brown people. I will not discount an element of racism from my analysis of this. And it's important to understand what has happened within the United States. As part of the right-wing resurgence, the kind of right that is now coming into prominence and increasingly has become influential is a right that in some ways is not uncomfortable with the notion that the white is right as well. So I do detect an element of racism there, quite apart from the fact that maybe these are not great diplomats, and so they don't have they haven't finished their language. The final element there, this is also aimed at domestic constituency in as much as it is aimed at India. So if you use strong language against an actor, a state, a country that you're targeting, it also plays well domestically. But the key element that I want to sort of emphasize here is that I'm not discounting some racial bias from my analysis insofar as explaining the particularly harsh and demeaning language is concerned.
Right. Sanjay, to return to the broad theme of our webinar, I mean, do you see, with all this, penalties, tariffs being imposed, do you see India moving away from the United States in its foreign policy postures?
I would put it the other way around. I would not say that India is moving away, but the US is moving away from India. And, you must recognize that a lot of things haven't happened. We don't have an ambassador with the US. And ideally, in a situation
he's coming
like
now. He's coming now.
He's coming now. But look at his statements. He said yesterday, which has not been reported till now, he said very categorically that India is our supporter in the BRICS. They'll do exactly what we want. So do we want to be known that way? Secondly, Sergio Gior, as he's called, is a man with given charge not just of India, but also South Asia, Central Asia, and Indians are rather uncomfortable. They think that India's presence has been diminished, although India becomes a headquarter, but its presence has been diminished because his concerns are going to be different. So when we think that he's going to Calcutta, he might be going to Dhaka, he might be going beyond. He would have a aircraft on his own, and he is linked to the White House. Secondly, Mr. Gior is making India more uncomfortable, primarily because they think that Mr. Gior would have no time for us. So if you notice, there's been a little shift in the way his submissions in the House is playing out. He's become slightly more conciliatory. He's praising India in some ways because the fear in the Americans' establishment is that his credentials may not be generally accepted very soon. He might be forced to wait, and that is what Americans don't want. And thirdly, they don't want America to believe. They don't think that they want a person who's looking after 10 other things other than India, and they want somebody totally dedicated to New Delhi rather than to Dushanbe and to some other
But the
country.
question that I was asking you, Sanjay, I completely understand that the US is moving away, but what about India? I mean, our prime minister, in reaction to Donald Trump, has said nothing. I mean, apart from
So
the tweets that were put out and his stress on buying Atmanirbhar things, he has not responded to Trump directly. So the
clearly,
point I'm making is, so are we still going to be tied to the Americans? That's why the prime minister, if that is the case, then it makes sense for the prime minister to remain silent.
so that is the reason why Mr. Prime Minister is silent on that, because he thinks that India's interest really lies in being with the United States of America. So it really rattles India that when you know that they don't respond, when you have Mr. Navarro calling us the Brahmin profiteering and calling us all kinds of names, or somebody calling us India, an American stooge, but you don't really get anything out of it. So it's a very difficult time for India if you look at it, and India thinks that it can ride out sooner than later. But if you look at it, it's just been 6, 7 or 8 months or 10 months since you had Mr. Trump in saddle, and he has more time to go. So if these policies continue and he continues to threaten us with more tariff, then I don't know how it will really happen, because India's comfort by joining hands with RIC, with Russia and China, is going to be very limited, because if you look at it, we are in conflict in all kinds of regions, especially with China. In Central Asia, we are having a problem. Look at Nepal. Nepal is also an outcome. We haven't discussed Nepal, but if you read between the lines, you would know that it's basically a geopolitical tension which is playing out. The Russians, the Chinese have a great sway over
Right,
Nepal. And
right.
during the Tianjin summit, he was there, the KP Sharma Oli. But
Yeah.
as soon as he returns,
I think
there's
we'll
no
need a
more time to
separate
close that.
session for Nepal, Sanjay.
I'm
We
saying
will
it's
need,
all linked
yeah,
to that. It's all
yeah,
linked.
yeah,
Till
yeah, yeah,
everything blows up. So
yeah,
we can talk about it later, but there is a problem that India have to face when it comes to
right.
China, and we cannot really be friendly with China the way that the entire structure is being put in place.
Right. And to Atul, we are in the scenario where we are. I mean, there are various ways we've reached there. I mean, we can analyze it. We also didn't speak about the fact that the general who became a field marshal was hosted to a dinner or lunch or whatever, and he wanted our prime minister also to come. I mean, whatever, he thinks that the field marshal and our prime minister at one level. That's his lookout. I'm not going to say anything on that. So the question is that there are some questions also, Aryan Kolumba picking up from whatever he's asking. So what are India's options now? That is the focus. So what do we do now? I mean, all this has happened. We also see Sanjay was pointing out that Sergio goes, nicer words backpedaling, but we also see the US Treasury Secretary asking the G7 basically to impose penalties on India for buying Russian oil, along with other buyers, of course. So what are our options now, really?
So two or three things, Amit. I think what has happened, and I think it is here to stay, is that we don't have the favorable international environment, strategic environment, security environment that we've enjoyed roughly for the past quarter century. So starting point should be that, and from there, just thinking about the implications of that. no matter what gets, even if the interpersonal equations with the Americans are repaired, you'll have to worry a great deal and be very, very careful about what you're going to concede insofar as the economic dimension is concerned, insofar as the trade dimension is concerned. Do you buy their energy and sort of say, well, we're going to do that? Do you want to, do economic reforms? Do you want to do economic reforms under pressure on your terms, or on terms that are more important to them? So you have to be careful there. Fundamentally, I think because we cannot be sure about we cannot be sure about whether the United States will continue to provide us with a bit of a backstop, a distant backstop, should things with China go bad again, because we can't be sure. We need to work our diplomacy and our political understanding over time to ensure that relationship is stable. The Americans are not going to come and present a security threat to us, but the Chinese will. So managing that relationship becomes critical. But the one thing that I think has been the theme of our conversation, Amit, which is lack of power. We are not powerful enough. We've got great resources, but we are not wealthy enough. And even if we generate wealth, we do not know how to translate that wealth into hard power. That ought to be the focus. How do you generate that wealth, and how do you generate that power in a manner that does not undercut, that does not destroy our domestic social contract, that does not in any way create these artificial or undesirable elements within our economic system, which is what some people call oligarchs. Those are the hard questions. But the central question is, the more power you have, the more real autonomy you have in international politics. Otherwise, your diplomacy will always be under strain. Your political leadership will always be wondering about the extent to which interpersonal relationships can manage strains in international affairs. But more importantly, you will be vulnerable to all of these strategic shocks, such as the ones that have come our way in recent weeks.
Right. So I'm going to read out as a comment from Suwalal Jangu, and Suwalal Jangu says the main problem in Indo-US relations is India's poor bargaining power. India needs China and Russia more than the Western world. India's problem is over-dependency on the US. I'll leave that as a comment. I'm not going to pose it to both of you. But to Sanjay, I want to ask you, Atul used the word race, the four-letter word, which we normally don't use in polite conversations. And I personally see a lot of merit in that word. But I also see merit, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Sanjay, I also see merit in the fact that there is an entire narrative that has been built up in the last quarter of a century by the Indian media about how important the United States is to India. And that narrative has also been helped along by the fact that a number of the children of our elite study and then go on to work in the United States. And one of the fears this strategic elite has is the H-1B visa, because they feel that this is part of Trump's domain and he can act on this as well. So do you feel that there is this narrow strategic elite which wants our interests and which is silent on the US because of our interests involved in children going abroad, studying, working, opportunities, stuff like that? How do you see it, Sanjay?
I think that's part of the entire narrative. There is nothing that was not expected. If you look at it, there are about 60 lakh Indians who have H-1B visa there, they're working there. And there are many more who are lurking somewhere in between. And there are many people who are on the other side of the wall in Mexico trying to get into the US. Because US has been sold as a land of dreams, something like where you go like El Dorado and things will get sorted out. So even when it comes to the elite, you have a certain kind of carrot which is entangled in front of them, and they would be told that, look, their fees and their education, everything would be sorted out if they do a few things that the Americans wanted. I remember, I covered the so-called security scam in the early 90s quite closely. And one of the things that came out in the security scam was that a report was put together by the RBI, and that showed that you had number of kids of the ruling elite of India who's studying in the US. Many of them working in the banks, which are the banks which are responsible for the security scam. So that link was very closely established by this investigation. So I don't find it worrying primarily because they are the ones who are aligned. They would be the decision maker. They have become like if you have the Pichais and others who are occupying important position, you think that they would look after India's interests. But that is not happening because, as rightly pointed out by Atul, India is the US is largely becoming racist. It's like they think the MAGA means going back to being white all
Right.
over again, making America great against means becoming more white than what it is. But tragically, what is happening is that US has become more anti-brown than anti-black. I hear all kinds of horror stories coming out from the US where they say in so many words that the browns are the ones who are treated very shabbily. Blacks
Right.
can take care of their own, but not the
Right.
browns, and brown need government support. So that is
So
what is playing out.
Sanjay, we are running out of time, so I'm just going to read a couple of comments that are coming. And one is from Sudhakar Rao Desai. And Sudhakar Rao Desai says, understanding the dynamics of international uh, monetary policy and currency relations is essential for India. Strengthening ties with the US enhances India's global stature and helps in creating an environment conducive to sustained economic growth. In contrast, short term alliances with countries like China and Russia might provide immediate economic perks but could jeopardize India's strategic autonomy and long term economic resilience. Again, I'm just going to leave this as a comment. And we are running out of time, but I'm going to ask there one straight question is coming from Radhika Kumar, as she puts it, and I'm going to ask Atul to respond to that one. And she says, "What are the consequences of India leaving both BRICS and Quad at the same time?"
Okay, so that's a rather dramatic one. Were this to happen, I think two things. One, your claim of commitment to multilateralism will, of course, be diminished. Your claim to attempting the shaping of international orders would also be diminished. I don't think it is likely. India would be the last actor to withdraw from any international grouping, and they are both Quad and BRICS. They are still groupings. They're not, institutionalized enough to sort of become full-fledged organizations. So unlikely to happen. But were this to happen, India's options would have narrowed quite significantly, and our claim to actually not just claim, but also our ability to act in a fairly autonomous fashion insofar as strategy is concerned, I think that would diminish as well.
So also to point out to Radhika that I think it would be fair to say that India is a founding member of BRICS and India is also a founding member of the Quad. And so far the Quad has shown no interest in, adding any letters to itself. So far we haven't seen that. So I guess it would be a tough call for India to withdraw, as you said, from multilateral forums like.
And Amit, if I could just very quickly move in, I mean, we've not withdrawn from the non-alignment movement, right? The non-aligned movement. I mean, the movement is languishing. We've never said no. So we don't withdraw out of multilateral groupings, even if they sort of become defunct in any
But
serious
our
fashion.
heart is not in it. I mean, let me put it that. I mean, we also know where our heart lies, and I think, I've seen successive prime ministers and they look so happy when they go to the United States. I don't see, similar happiness when they go to Russia and so on. So we'll leave that discussion for another day. But I'd just like to thank both you, Atul, and Sanjay. We've had a fascinating discussion. And the fact is that we live in interesting times, as the Chinese say. And world affairs are in a flux all over the world. I mean, things are changing. What's happening in West Asia? What's happening in Brazil? That's another country we didn't touch on. It has similar tariffs imposed to ours. They're handling it in a slightly different way from what we're doing. But we live in interesting times. Our neighborhood is troubled. Sanjay referred to Nepal, needs separate and detailed treatment. All these issues are coming up at a time when I think India needs to be more engaged with the world, not less engaged. And as Atul also mentioned, that we need to find points of leverage which we can use to strengthen our hard power. He says that he's not a great believer in soft power. And Sanjay, thank you so much for all your insights. You watched governments come and go, foreign policies change and remain. So thank you so much for this discussion. I'm grateful to both of you for joining this special Frontline webinar.
Thank you, Amit. It was a pleasure.
Thanks a lot.